Baku, Azerbaijan. Located in the south of the Caucasus Mountains, the city lies on the shore of the Caspian Sea. Its geographical position turned out to be strategic, mainly owing to its position being one of the major Silk Road paths. This ancient trade route was connecting Asia to Europe. The caravans following the road were carrying, amongst other goods, food, fabrics and carpets. Baku's oil, used as fuel, combustible or lubricant, was also conveyed through this road. Yet in the 19th century, for the first time in history, the oil production started to become industrialized. Every day, the ground around Baku was giving hundreds of tons of oil. Some large oil lakes appeared around the huge frames, burning day and night. Mad and excited, people were buying some small ground plots in hope to find oil resources. Many of them turned to be rich. Thus, after the abolition of the Tsarist tax system in 1872, an oil boom attracted local and foreign businessmen. One of them was Robert Nobel. The Swedish entrepreneur and chemist Robert belonged to the prominent Nobel family, known for its entrepreneurs and inventors. He first came to Azerbaijan looking for a special variety of trees. On his way back home, he went through Baku. During his life, he faced numerous failures, but he never lost his optimism and hope, and so he went to Baku. In this city, absolutely secret and unknown to him, he believed to find something that would change his life and put an end to his misfortune. For Robert, Baku appeared to be a unique city with its noisy bazaars and at the same time quiet and narrow streets. The city was very contrasting. It was characterized by some bright tints, the carpets, the sound of the azan coming from the mosques, and the amazing mixture of spicy fragrances, along with the smell of oil. Baku's citizens were mostly occupied with small trades. However, Baku's oil remained Robert's main interest. Because Robert understood straight away that in the future this oil could compete with the Western oil, and the resources were not lower than Americans.
The kerosene was already at that time a product that was demanded inside Russia, and it was imported from the United States, very big quantities.
Businesses in the United States were already moving along. They were already fairly well established. Whereas here, although the first wells had been drilled here, the business itself had not really taken hold.
Robert was surprised by the very poor level of development of the oil industry, according to the huge amounts of available petroleum in Baku. For a long time, people were used to transport oil from oil production areas to the refineries in wooden carts filled up with barrels. This simple and very slow means of transportation was considered to be the most reliable. However, in reality, it was not always like this. In the oil fields, mainly in surroundings of Baku, people were trying to extract oil from oil wells in a very primitive way. Even though such kind of oil extraction was very dangerous, for Azer, it turned to be the only way to earn his living.
And I think what he saw at that time, he was a bit terrified about the conditions that people were suffering under, the working conditions. And also he realized that the quality was not as it could be.
Robert was always searching for innovations. He was traveling across Baku and its surroundings. So while traveling in Shirokani, he found out Atishka, a temple of everlasting flames.
There he witnessed the local celebrations of the traditional holiday Nowruz Bayram. Robert felt like he was immersed in a world of dreams, in his childhood dreams. There he was feeling comfortable and peaceful. Robert plunged into the dance of flames, and he felt he was carried away by his childhood memories.
As you know, there was a temple here where people came for purify themselves in their last days. I would guess that when Robert came here, he discovered this tradition and probably got a little bit attached to it.
Robert evaluated the situation in the oil sector fairly well, and he bought a small oil refinery from De Boer, a Dutch oil entrepreneur.
That is part of business to try to grow all the time, and if there is a new market coming up, like in Azerbaijan, and oil producing, of course, that's something to try to take also. It's part of the economic system to grow all the time.
Robert had some big projects, but no fewer problems. What he was going to face in this area was absolutely new for him. However, the basis of the oil company was already laid. Until the beginning of the oil boom in Baku, the kerosene, which was getting more and more popular in the world, was not only refined in one and only country, but also in one and only state, Pennsylvania, and even more. There was only one and only company ruling in the world oil industry, the Standard Oil. The company was processing 90% of the extracted oil in the USA. The demand for American kerosene to be imported in Russia was very high. Using all the federal and local tricks and subterfuges to build up the oil giant, the company made small and medium-sized companies subordinated to it. The Standard Oil was the property of John Davison Rockefeller. Robert realized that at that moment he was not strong enough to fight such a giant rival. At the same time, the Baku oil entrepreneurs were showing some good resistance. Every dog has his day, he thought. Robert still had a lot to do. The refinery was not at full capacity. Thus, Robert tempted some new working forces and hired some specialists and engineers. Azer was also searching for work. He came to this to find work. Robert wanted to enter the market with the best quality product, for which there would be a high demand. It's interesting that Baku's oil has special features, revealing its low sulfur content. The use of fire in producing kerosene reminded Robert of the ancient Zoroastrian traditions, with a flame used to purify the human spirit from sins.
He managed to improve the quality from 25% pure from other rest products, so he managed to increase that to 40%. So he got quite immediately a competitive advantage that meant that the business took off very rapidly.
The Russian market was taken up by the American kerosene. It was necessary to think about some new strategy to improve the oil business. In order to increase the output of the refinery, Robert decided to invest in some new equipment. Robert was sure that the oil business had great perspectives. The implementation of supplementary drilling equipment could mean more kerosene. From then on, the refineries will process more crude oil. Robert started some oil exploration works on plots he had bought earlier in Sabunchu and Balakhani. Robert realized that it was very important to have oil extraction on his own oil fields. The areas were already defined. We only have to start drilling. The lack of modern drilling methods proved to be a stumbling block to Robert's projects. The researches in the field led him to a private scout. Murtuza Mukhtarov was known as a young and prospective engineer.
It's interesting that despite his young age, Murtuza Mukhtarov was in the field of oil well drilling technologies.
Robert liked the new drilling process suggested by Mukhtarov. Thus, they agreed to start the extraction on Nobel's oil fields. Everything was going well, and he was waiting for his brother to come to Baku.
Robert was informing Ludwig all the time what was happening here, and he made really Ludwig interested. And that's why he said that petroleum has a fantastic future. He could see that from Petersburg. He went down to look for himself and to take help from, and Robert discussed it and showed him what it was, and he could see that together they could do very important things. So he came after the invitation, we could say. Robert said it would be good if you come down. Let's discuss it.
Ludwig was probably a very, very good organizer. Maybe a bit better structure than Robert was.
Ludwig was a great entrepreneur and had his factory in St. Petersburg. He was truly supporting his brother's oil business with his good advice and financial support. Ludwig was happy that Robert finally found the business that he had been looking for quite a long time. For the first time, Ludwig came to Baku with his 17-year-old son, Emanuel. Emanuel was born in St. Petersburg. He was a student at the Institute of the Polytechnic in Berlin. He got his primary education at St. Anna School.
Ludwig's eldest son, Emanuel, came to Baku with his father in order to get acquainted with the work of the oil company. Ludwig's son's main goal was to take over in the future his father's business.
Robert told his brother everything about his business and the work of the company. Ludwig took the information with great interest. However, his major interest was related to the quality of the kerosene. This kerosene is really of a much better quality than the one from the US. Such product will help to develop a successful business in the near future, thought Ludwig. Ludwig got really surprised when he saw the oil carried to the refineries in a very primitive way. It did not match with his concept of the modern oil production. Soon young Emmanuel got accustomed to Baku's environment, and he started to work within the family business. Nobel's rivals couldn't remain neutral to such success. Thus, by strengthening their position, the Nobels turned to be strong competitors. The oil refineries were continuously on, and they did produce a high-quality kerosene. The fame of the qualitative and cheap Nobel's kerosene was increasing every day. The refineries' products were delivered to storehouses and to retails. Some unsettling messages started to penetrate the Standard Oil office in New York City on 26 Broadway Street. The Standard Oil couldn't rely on its advantage anymore.
And so that was the beginning. And so what Rockefeller saw was that in order to make maximum profit, you had to control the market. And to control the market, you had to own everything from the well up, what they call a vertical monopoly.
No doubt, they were not on an equal footing. The Nobels put themselves at risk by combating the worldwide well-known giant Standard Oil. However, the dice were cast, and at the same time, that was a clear challenge to compete. At this stage, the Nobel's kerosene should have to resist the pressure of the Standard Oil. The Baku oil production would never manage to fight the Western one without implementing some modern scientific inventions and engineering innovations. Thus, after investigating the situation of the business, together with his brother, Ludwig started to elaborate a substantial business program to improve and develop the Baku oil industry.
For many weeks, they had been talking about the way they could organize and extend their business. They did plan the methods to extract and refine the petroleum and the ways to export it from the Caspian Sea by railway, by sea, and through the pipelines.
I think he was one of the... He took very early the initiative to create a better infrastructure for transporting the oil products. So, and this was obvious for Robert as well.
In order to realize Nobel's ambitious project, they first of all needed to invest a huge amount of money. This investment has been provided on one hand by Ludwig from the earnings from his factory in St. Petersburg, and on the other hand by the brothers' own capitals.
One of the big challenges at that time, in the already beginning, was the logistic. And that was one of the main hurdles that the brothers needed to overcome.
And he, together with Robert, did the innovation to think we don't have to carry this oil in barrels, we can do it otherwise. And that is an innovation, to think out of the box, really.
First of all, it was necessary to decrease the transportation costs of oil from oil fields to refineries. In order to overcome this problem, the brothers decided to build an oil pipeline. After the steel pipes ordered in the USA arrived in Baku, the brothers started the construction of the pipeline. That was the first significant pipeline construction project realized in Europe. The pipeline stretched out from the oil fields up to the refineries. The local oil industrialists felt suspicious about this project. They were afraid that the crude oil could spoil the pipes and cause leaks.
People here, they were afraid of getting their jobs, losing their jobs because of the new ideas for the transportation.
That's why they could not hope this project to be realized easily. Numerous barrel carriers and car drivers would lose their jobs. They all feared this innovation would deprive them from their incomes. In the end, the most courageous of them declared war on the newly constructed pipeline. But fortunately, there was someone who could block their dirty plans. The number of people willing to work at the Nobel's promising company was growing day after day. That's why the Nobels decided to build a new residential settlement for their workers. To this end, the young Emmanuel started to look for some appropriate areas for such settlement. They were supposed to be able to accommodate 3,000 workers with their families.
And they work with human right, with corporate responsibility. And that was very new at that time.
Manuel was disappointed with the living conditions of his workers. He described to Azar the concept of the housing settlement that should soon appear here. The business on the local market was successful. The Nobel's Baku plants were growing and extending, and they were increasing their revenues. But the situation on foreign markets was quite different. The Baku kerosene was sent to Azerbaijan, Russia, by sea in barrels. There, the barrels were conveyed to Russian central regions by boat on rivers. From Azerbaijan, the oil was also sent to St. Petersburg and Baltic seaports by railway. No doubt that this transportation method was increasing the price of the oil by many times.
Thus, 1 pound of Baku kerosene costed 20 cents. When delivered to St. Petersburg, it was twice more expensive and costed 2 rubles, whereas the kerosene produced in the USA costed only 1 ruble and 30 cents. Brothers observed and understood that that is not good, and they had to think to reduce oil transportation costs. They realized that the only solution was to build an oil tanker. To this end, Ludvig involved the best shipbuilding engineers from Sweden in order to build an oil tanker.
This ship, built in a Swedish shipyard, was the first steam engine oil tanker in the world. The tanker was named Zarathustra, in tribute to the fire worshippers' prophet. Since then, there was no need to use barrels to transport oil and oil products by sea. The Zarathustra tanker, with its 242 tons capacity, could convey the Baku oil by sailing the Caspian Sea and later the Volga River up to the Tsaritsyn city. The Zarathustra tanker, that was first of the kind to be operating in Azerbaijan, started a new era in oil transportation by sea.
I can take an example, for example. This is a pen, and why does it have this size? Why does it look like that? Why is it for? Because it's the old feather. People took feather from birds and put under the writing. And this is the old thing, and it's been better and better by doing the same thing. But an innovation, it is another pen that I have here. This is a pen. And this is formed for the finger to use it in a good way. It's thinking in a new way. That's an innovation. This is doing the same but better, and this is innovation.
The tankers brought the oil products up to Tsaritsyn. From there, they were loaded up the barges to be delivered to other cities by sailing the river. But there was a problem. It was not possible to load the crude oil directly from the oil tankers into the tanker wagons. To solve this problem, the nobles occurred to produce high-capacity tanker wagons. Ludwig achieved a good deal of his plans, like the first oil pipeline in Europe, the first oil tanker in the world, the tanker wagons, and numerous oil storages throughout Russia. The nobles did put about 1 million rubles into all of this. However, delivering oil to all Russian regions and being competitive with the American kerosene required much more funds. Alfred was the youngest of the Nobel's brothers. He lived in Paris. As a chemist, Alfred Nobel dedicated all his life to the research concerning the explosives and especially to the safe production and usage of nitroglycerin.
He was very lucky about his patents with the dynamite, and the dynamite business developed very rapidly and accelerated throughout Europe and also in the rest of the world. So he got very rich on the manufacturing of the dynamite.
They needed to use dynamite to construct buildings, channels, tunnels, and railways.
There were a lot of quarrels and scandals around the Baku oil on the Paris stock market, and Alfred was greatly interested in it. Alfred suggested his brothers to establish a shareholding company, but Robert disliked this idea.
Well, actually, Robert was against, and Ludwig was against it too. He wanted to say, don't have shares, we want to own it by ourselves.
After some long debates, Robert agreed with the idea, and they created the petroleum production company Nobel Brothers Limited. The initial share capital was 3 million rubles.
Robert came here, he started the whole thing, and after that Ludwig came in with money and practice and the whole factory he had in Petersburg to start to do the pipelines and whatever. And Robert was a guy who tried, who thought, this is an opportunity, let's try it, let's do it. He was willing, he was brave actually. And then Ludwig was not the brave, but the one who knew how to do it factory and had the money. And after that, they got more money from Alfred Nobel, the third brother, who had a lot of money. And it took all these three guys to fix it. It was Robert, Ludwig, and Alfred.
After discussions, the brothers created a logo for their newly established enterprise.
Although they were coming from the West, the Nobel brothers were very interested in the fire worship and Zoroastrianism. That's why they decided to choose Atishka, a temple of everlasting fire, as a symbol for the company.
On the 18th of May, 1879, the Russian Tsar Alexander II ratified the Articles of Incorporation of the Petroleum Production Company Nobel Brothers Limited. Later on in business correspondence, it was abbreviated to Branobel.
And we can be happy that they decided to go into the shares, because that means that they had something to sell to Standard Oil after the revolution. Otherwise, they would have lost everything.
The invention of oil transportation tankers to replace the oil transportation by land upgraded the oil business to an absolutely new level. The Black City was the name of the industrial district built in Baku's suburbs. This name reflected exactly the essence of the district because there were about 200 oil refineries. There were numerous local and foreign companies operating in the fast development of the oil industry in Baku. The Branobel company could meet about half of the kerosene demand in Russia. The Nobel brothers proudly informed their shareholders that the American kerosene will be soon eliminated from the Russian market. The managers of the Standard Oil were aware that the Tsar government would never give them a chance to take the Branobel company over. However, they could make an attempt to put the Branobel shares in control of stocks by keeping Ludwig at the head of the company.
Rockefeller tended to undercut his competition. That was the way he put them out. He either bought them or put them out of business.
Rockefeller sent his reliable assistant, William Libby, to negotiate with Ludwig.
Libby was his foreign representative. It was sort of like his Secretary of State, if you want to put it in political terms.
Rockefeller, which never knew what the failure was very interested in developing an oil industry in Baku. Thus, Baku kerosene was gradually pushing the American kerosene out of the Russian market. The unstable situation ruling on markets, the intensive working process, and the unbearable hot climate of Baku affected Robert's health in a bad way.
Who has great temperament. He got angry, he got sad, he was happy, and he was going rushing from one side to another, going on all the time, taking the risks as he did.
In 1880, his delicate health urged Robert to leave the business he established and to go to Sweden. The doctors did find out that he was contaminated with tuberculosis. Tired and exhausted, deep down, Robert felt that he was leaving Baku forever. Libby had to get the control of Nobel Company's assets. The oil giant that had easily swallowed small and medium business in America attempted to do the same in Baku. However, what was easy and possible on the Rockefellers' motherland was not possible at all in Russia. After John Rockefeller got the message concerning Nobel's refusal, he decided to use his favorite method to get rid of his rival. He worked on decreasing the prices of kerosene.
And it was that sort of very ruthless form of business operation that allowed him to build the corporation that he had. But also later, it proved to be his undoing.
The dumping against the Nobel's company strongly struck their position.
Competition emerged during that time. But anyway, I mean, the profit of the company fluctuated a lot because of the oil price went down very rapidly and then went up very steeply after a while. So that was a typical pattern of the oil business. So very difficult to navigate. But obviously, he succeeded to be very successful at that time.
They had to get out of this bad situation in a short period of time. Nobel's refusal to Rockefeller's proposal was also related to some forthcoming inventions. Dmitry Mendeleev was a young Russian inventor and chemist. He was already quite well known in the scientific spheres. One of Mendeleev's revolutionary inventions was the endless oil refining system.
This method gave a chance to refine 10 times more oil than previously. Later on, this system was applied at industrial scale in the Nobel's refineries. This technology left the American ones 10 years behind.
So now, the Russian market was no longer sufficient to absorb the millions of barrels of kerosene produced in Baku. It was high time to find ways to reach to the international markets, no matter what. After oil refining processes great amount of oil, residues were discharged into the environment and into the sea. It was not easy to inflame this fuel oil, and while burning, it was generating heavy toxic fumes. It was deemed useless. Nevertheless, the Nobels had faith in the future of the fuel oil, so they collected it into big metal tanks and stored it. In order to enlarge the use of fuel oil, Ludvig managed to inflame the fuel oil by improving some existing sprayer. Thus, cheap fuel oil replaced the firewood and coal and turned to be an alternative combustible energy.
And they had the foothold because they were here first. And I think they simply did not want to give up the control to a foreign entity like Standard.
While Ludwig was working on his inventions, another serious rival appeared unexpectedly on the oil market. An increasing interest towards Baku oil was observed in Europe. Very soon, Alphonse James de Rothschild, one of the owners of the Parisian banking house of the Rothschild family, became interested in Baku oil. Rothschild was the owner of an oil refinery in Europe. He made some great investment to construct the Baku-Batumi railway in order to make the delivery of Baku oil to European markets possible. After the railway was achieved, Alphonse de Rothschild bought some oil plots in Baku suburbs and started to build an oil refinery. Despite the new strong rival, Branobel was just about to finish the housing lot for its workers.
Ludwig attracted to Baku some specialists from Sweden, Finland, Norway, and Germany. However, they all got ill and passed away. At that time, cholera, malaria, tuberculosis, and other illnesses were a real scourge. Ludwig realized that he couldn't lose such competent people.
He had built in Kashla the Villa Petrolia as the company's headquarters. Most of the kerosene refineries and oil production plants were located in that district, so-called the Black City. A modern park with flowers and rare trees had been laid out in the area of the complex. This park, right next to an oil industry area, looked like a piece of paradise. A library, a sports club, and a medical center were built in the park. Moreover, all the houses were supplied with electric lamps. Right there, the very first telephone line of Baku has been brought into operation. A huge housing development in Sabuncu area called Dagustu had been laid for the workers of the Branobel company. There, 4,000 workers with their families were provided with accommodation in some 1- or 2-floored constructions.
And they pioneered that sort of social well-being for their workers that was, at that time, very unknown in the business world. To my knowledge, they'd never set up any kind of a village in that regard for their workers the way the Nobel brothers did.
The Nobel's oil empire did grow quickly. Their victory in their struggle with the unbeatable Rockefeller, as well as the fast increase of the sales and the support of the imperial government, had been earned thanks to their brand new inventions and their very progressive thinking.
Earlier, the American Standard Oil was preeminent on the Russian market. Later, the Branobel got the upper hand and pulled the Rockefeller Standard Oil out from the Russian market.
Being a highly educated engineer, Emmanuel became a worthy successor of his father. Despite his young age, he already had some perfect leadership and management skills. The Branobel staff was working hard, with pleasure, and was developing. Thanks to some skillful and hard-working businessmen, the kerosene exported from Baku fully met the Russians' demand. Everything was going well, and there was absolutely no need to worry. However, the Baku's oil king unexpectedly got ill. He was sure he was suffering from the malaria or the typhus. But the doctors concluded that he had some heart troubles and respiratory problems. The doctors highly recommended Ludvig to start a medical treatment. At this point, all his hopes and prospects were referred to his son Emmanuel. The Baku oil was conveyed by means of a couple of major routes, by the Caspian Sea or by the Vladikavkaz Railway. These two routes were quite inconvenient to reach the European markets. Emmanuel realized that the only gateway to Europe was the newly launched Baku-Batumi Railway. Rothschild had already done a lot for this, and that was the reason why the Russian government granted him some privileges. The entire oil transport railway network was under Rothschild's control. Emmanuel only needed to get an agreement with Alphonse de Rothschild for the transportation for his oil.
I think it started out as competition, but then I think they began to cooperate.
Rothschild was a very experienced, smart, and far-seeing businessman. During this meeting, Emmanuel made a positive impression. A common agreement augured some nice perspectives, both for Nobel and Rothschild. The goal was to keep Rockefeller out of the European markets. Very soon, the small and calm littoral city of Batumi turned to be a significant oil terminal. The oil products arriving from Baku by train were from there shipped to Europe by sea. The fast production growth, the struggle to gain admittance on new markets, and the exploration of new oil resources, all these facts were later called the Oil War. Some companies were getting stronger and emerged from the competition, while others were stagnating or even went bankrupt. Some companies, to avoid the crash, joined some richer ones or closely cooperated with them. Amongst the Baku oil barons, there were millionaires like Zeynalabdin Tagiev, Musa Nagiev, Shamsi Asadulayev, Murtuza Mukhtarov, Haji Dadashov, Isabey Hajinsky, and they were ones who won the merciless oil wars. Foremost, the Branobel company tried to catch as many allies as possible.
Buy from Nobels, or when we sell to Nobels, a pud is always a pud. It's always a pud. They're not trying to cheat. They're honest. We don't have to sign, we take our hands. So I think that's something they brought with themselves, that kind of moral, ethical and moral. That's important for all business, of course, to be trusted.
After Branobel got the access to the European markets thanks to the Baku-Batumi Railway, the nobles started to feel need in more oil resources. During a meeting with a group of local oil entrepreneurs, Emmanuel suggested them to have an agreement on oil purchases and sales with favorable conditions. Although some businessmen found this long-term agreement suggestion not that favorable, many of them accepted it and joined the syndicate. Thus, the Branobel company got the Baku oil to be exported to European markets in huge amounts. Amongst the Baku millionaires, there were those whose advice and comments were taken by the nobles with respect and faith. Unfortunately, Emmanuel's closest advisor and soulmate, his father, unexpectedly passed away in France while on therapy. Ludvig's brother, his son, and his daughter Anna went there for a last farewell. The Baku oil king, the 57-year-old Ludvig, died from heart failure in a sanatorium. That was a very serious loss for young Emmanuel. However, some big and important deals were waiting for him in the nearest future. The great emperor, Alexander III of Russia, arrived in Baku in 1888. Emmanuel had to introduce himself with dignity. The Baku oil industry had some special importance for the Russian Tsar. Emmanuel didn't want to lose the warm relations established by his father with the Tsar's family. That was not easy at all.
But he had a really tough mission. His father died and they had to take care of this huge company and had to meet the Tsar. And he was only 30 or something like that.
In 1888, the Tsar Alexander III traveled to Baku with his family and some of his ministers. Emmanuel and his sister Anna welcomed the guests. Some of the Baku oil barons were also invited to the meeting with the Tsar. After a short welcome speech, the emperor was invited under a tent to get a present. Emmanuel gave it to the emperor on behalf of the Branobel company. That was a box made of special oak tree and surrounded by iron. Inside the box, there were 24 cut glass containers with some samples of Baku oil and some different products from this oil.
Rockefeller would not have had that kind of support from the government. And so he would have had just the opposite of anything. The government would be on his back, so to speak, rather than support. And so quite different situation from what the Nobel brothers had here.
The meeting was going on in a very nice and friendly atmosphere. Emmanuel answered all the emperor's questions with enthusiasm, and he shared with him his feelings about his plans for the future. Alexander III was very satisfied with the oil industry development in Baku and the Branobel company's achievements. After Ludwig's death, Emmanuel became the spokesperson in discussions with the Standard Oil. This young and prospective businessman could pretend as well because he was aware of all the slightest details of the business. Many big cities were provided with the oil produced by the Nobel Brothers company: Astrakhan, Tsaritsyn, Batumi, St. Petersburg, Rostov, Saratov, Warsaw, Vladivostok, Moscow, Nizhny Novgorod, Odessa, but also Oryol. The Nobel's oil transporting fleet counted not less than 30 tankers. The Branobel products were also exported to Italy, Austria, Tunisia, France and Great Britain via Batumi, Novorossiysk and some Turkish terminals on the Black Sea. At the same time, the oil was conveyed to Germany, Holland and Scandinavian countries via the Baltic Sea. The Nobels had a special railway park consisting of 3,000 wagons for the transportation of kerosene. The Standard Oil Company was facing an aggressive sales campaign initiated by the Nobels. Worrying that the Baku oil had been already on the European markets, the Standard Oil decided to switch from words to action.
The same way he would have reacted by lowering prices, by undercutting, because a company coming from Azerbaijan or from Europe would have had greater transportation costs to get their product in there. And so Rockefeller could stand to lower the price, undercut the competition until it was no longer profitable for the other folks to do it. And he could hold out longer than the other company, or at least that's what he assumed, because that was the tactic that he used all the way through, by just underpricing until the other people either disappeared or he bought them.
Despite a severe blow by the Standard Oil, the Nobels, together with Rothschilds, replied. Their counterattack was a success. The Standard Oil was observing with horror the expansion on the map of the competition zones with Russia. The Nobels won the first phase of the kerosene war. They forced the mighty Rockefeller to acknowledge them as an equal partner and to start negotiations on the division of the oil market.
The Nobel brothers were as good in business as Rockefeller, and they simply were not going to give up control of what they had built. And I think it was a matter of like, two bears coming in the same area, and only one bear was going to dominate.
For most of the oil businessmen, the oil business was like a great card game. The time to divide the world kerosene markets between the world's biggest financial groups has come. The Standard Oil kept 90% of the American kerosene market and was controlling a major part of the European market. Rothschilds stood for the Asian and Caucasus markets. The Nobels were supplying the overall Russian market with kerosene. However, Emmanuel did not agree with such a division that was preferred by the Standard Oil.
As predicted, this meeting had been pointless, and again, Libby had to come back home with nothing tangible. The oil war was getting even more severe. Once again, Nobels got advantage upon Rockefeller. They froze on the paper all the Rockefeller's plans on Baku oil.
Kağıt üzerinde dondurdular.
In 1896, Robert suddenly passed away in the Swedish city of Krokak, where he was living with his family. Robert Noble, who laid the basis of a great oil empire, was one of the first progressive businessmen. He gave a great impetus to the Baku oil industry development. Robert, who had been interested in oil from his childhood, remained truly faithful to this magical liquid. The same year was also tragic for Alfred Nobel. Some months after his brother died, he passed away in an absolute solitude in his Italian villa in San Remo. He was only 63. According to his will, all his money and properties were turned into securities, and a special fund would be set up with earnings from those securities. Each year, a percentage of that fund was dedicated to the award of a special prize on a 5-nomination basis.
They didn't know about the prize, that it would be a prestigious prize. No one knew that at that time.
Did Alfred know how important the prize he created would be? He could hardly know. But today the Nobel Prize is considered to be the most prestigious award in the world. About 15 to 17% of the Nobel Prize funds were coming from the Baku oil selling by the Nobel Brothers company. The setting up of the Nobel Prize is indeed a fascinating story. The day when Alfred's brother Ludvig passed away, some newspapers published by mistake some crucial articles about Alfred's death. These articles titled "The Death of the King of War" and "Death of an Inventor, the End of the King of the Dynamite" were published. When Alfred read these articles, he just realized he didn't want to stay in the memory of humanity as the inventor of the dynamite, which brought disasters and death. Right after this event, Alfred started to think about an eponymous award fund that he started in his will and testament.
Maybe that has something to do that he was living alone all his life. He had no children of his own. So that might be contributed to his decision to create this foundation. Other reasons might be that maybe he didn't see maybe he was afraid of having his relatives to inherit his fortune and spend the money on in a irresponsible way. I don't know.
Actually, there were 2 prizes, and we have the Bröderna that was created and I think was given away 3 times too.
In 1904, with the initiative of the Baku oil owners, Baku branch of the Russian Technical Society set up an Emmanuel Nobel Award. The prize was given for best achievements and scientific inventions in the field of oil industry.
It's a pity that the prize was given only thrice in 1909, 1911, and 1914. They stopped giving the prize as the First World War began.
Bu mükafatın verilmesi dayandırıldı.
Emmanuel was a skillful strategist and at the same time a perfect diplomat. He had chosen some strong and reliable allies in order to solve the problems. Emmanuel Nobel and Alphonse de Rothschild got a secret agreement in order to create the Nob-Mazout cartel. This cartel was created with the goal to resist the Standard Oil on the world market.
They did cooperate for some time, and even for decreasing the oil prices when needed to resist the competitors. They were some real capitalists struggling to win the world market, and they did every possible thing to beat the Standard Oil.
Many legal actions against the Standard Oil by oil entrepreneurs who went bankrupt also helped Nob-Mazout to be successful in the European market.
Rockefeller, of course, had his hands full back at home because his business practices and his monopoly by the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century was coming under very close scrutiny. And so he was beginning to have problems back home that required his attention. At about the time these kinds of things were happening, Congress was already investigating Standard Oil and its monopolistic tendencies and its very anti-competition. And so eventually, of course, Congress came in about 3 or 4 years later and began to really jump on the thing until finally the Supreme Court ordered the breakup of Standard Oil. And they developed, I think it was 40 small companies out of it.
Rockefeller, whose business career was put to an end, passed his business empire to his son, an empire that had lost its all significance and power. After that, Rockefeller moved to live in his countryside villa, where he spent his days mostly playing golf, his favorite hobby. Meanwhile, the Branobel company's business was going better and better. In 1906, the company celebrated its 1 billion pounds of crude oil. In order to mark this event in history, Emmanuel ordered a special piece of jewelry from a famous jewelry house in St. Petersburg. This article was created based on sketches personally drawn by Emmanuel. That was a masterpiece created personally by the famous jeweler Fabergé. The jewel was a symbol reflecting the company's activity and at the same time the nobles' respect towards the land of Azerbaijan, to its oil and to its national traditions.
Well, one thing, of course, he was very proud that the company had produced 1 million pound oil, and he wanted to manifest that with something. And as he was Fabergé's next biggest customer, the Tsar was the biggest, that was naturally the way to go, I think, for him. He did buy quite a lot of things from Fabergé, and this was a very special thing.
During his visit to Europe, Emmanuel got an anonymous invitation for a round of golf. He had an idea about the invitation sender, and so he decided to go to the agreed place. The person who invited Emmanuel surprised him very much. That was John Davison Rockefeller. Despite all the troubles he was going through, he seemed to look cheerful and good-willing. Emmanuel did not understand what Rockefeller wanted from him. To play golf? Why not? As he did in business, Rockefeller was playing according to his own rules. It would be Emmanuel's naivety to expect a fair play from Rockefeller, even if he was just playing golf. You should not go out to the playground if you are not ready to withstand such a rival in an appropriate way. Although he was quite old, Rockefeller played perfectly, as in business. The game reached an epic final stage. However, Rockefeller didn't make his last strike, which should have brought him to victory.
Knowing the gentleman, he would probably have liked to win, but at the same time, he probably would have missed his putt so the other person would win and feel better. And that way would give him an in to do his business from a point of view of weakness in that person's eyes, but not from Rockefeller.
Maybe he also would make his last strike on another round, and this bet would cost more than just a golf round. It is hard to say if this meeting was decisive or not, but what we can be certain of, the big game was approaching its final stage. It's interesting, what else was waiting for him? Perhaps Emmanuel felt that the hard times are coming, which will change not only the destiny of his company, but of the entire country as well. At the beginning of the 20th century, Baku turned to a center of the revolution in the Caucasus. Here and there were strikes. The street riots turned into ethnic confrontations. Thousands of innocent Muslims were killed. Some sabotages were happening in the Baku oil fields. Oil derricks and wells in flame reflect the picture of the time.
It was a hard time. The majority of people living at the Villa Petrolia wanted to put an end to the contract with the company and return to their motherlands. Branobel lost many of these specialists.
Så någonstans på vägen så tror jag man förlorade kunskap här.
The unstable situation in Russia forced Rothschild to leave the country in 1912. Soon, World War I began. The government only urged to increase the fuel supply for the front. All the refineries were flat out. The Nobel fleet, consisting of 40 tankers and barges, was conveying huge amounts of oil products on the Caspian and Black Seas.
They thought that when the war would end, they would continue their business in the same way. However, it was a wrong idea. In 1918, Lenin's decree did put an absolute end to all their positive thoughts. The decree said that anyone who will not support the socialist regime or will impede should be arrested and executed. That was an explicit sign for private entrepreneurs to leave Russia. The Workers' Committee suggested nationalizing the Branobel and managing it themselves.
Baku was in disorder. People were in a mess. The government was divided. Gunshots and explosions could be heard everywhere. Sabotages started in the oil fields. The fire from the burning oil fields and wells plunged Baku into some darkness. People were in a mess. Thus, the 50 years long activity of more than 200 oil companies that contributed to the development of the oil industry in Baku was stopped by the Bolsheviks. Emmanuel didn't want to leave Baku like this. He wanted to express his gratitude to this country, to this nation, to this land. Indeed, about 40 years of his family's history were closely connected to Azerbaijan's fate. However, deep in his heart, he was happy. He was happy that his father and his uncles had never seen such a bitter end. He was also happy because he had learned so much from life. The company they had been building for years became a victim of a bitter political change. Despite his great loss, Emmanuel left Azerbaijan with feelings about things that were most precious, the moral values. He realized that no matter how rich and influential the person is, when time comes, everything ends and disappears. Everything that was created by a man would be the heritage to his descendants. And that will create an open space for them to go ahead, because his ancestors did everything possible for this. But that's progress. That's life. That's heritage. Emmanuel, who spent 2 months traveling, finally arrived to his motherland, Sweden. There he celebrated Christmas with his family. The following years, Emmanuel worked and traveled a lot. He loved to repeat the joke, "Nationalization is a beautiful word that describes an awful event." Even if Emmanuel wanted to restart his oil business he didn't succeed in, he chose not to. He lived a full and interesting life and died in Sweden in 1932 at the age of 73. The Nobel Brothers company was sold in 1970.